Welcome to the 80-20 Baseball Podcast. Strike! The 80-20 Coaching Masterclass. Our weekly get-together where coaches go from new to good and good to great. Mastering the fundamentals and the art of coaching.
Welcome, coaches, parents, players. Welcome to episode 299. Next week, we will be publishing our 300th episode. Speaking of 300 episodes, we'll be starting our 7th year of this podcast in December. No plans to slow down. We're going to keep it rolling. In fact, I have a list of 20 topics, 20 different things to discuss on this podcast that we have not discussed before. And we're always looking to iterate and optimize and get better with the coaching strategies that we've discussed over the last 299 episodes. One of the main goals I had when I started this podcast was to continue to improve and iterate the coaching tips and suggestions that we talk about on this podcast. One of the biggest reasons, other than my extensive experience in baseball, coaching baseball, playing baseball, and my passion for the game, my interest in the game for 40 years, has been my interest in improving and always asking, could this be done better? Could this be done just slightly better? Could this be optimized? Is there an iteration of this that could improve it, could make it more game-like, more scalable? For example, talking about drills and training routines. What should we remove? What should we scale down? How can we craft and improve our message as coaches? How do we reorganize the priorities as we gain even more in-depth knowledge about coaching baseball? So here we are, almost into our 7th year, and we got 2 great things to get into today. So I heard an interview recently from a vice president of scouting development for a Major League Baseball team. And this vice president of scouting development, somebody who's very knowledgeable, knows what they're looking for, the key and common characteristics and traits of successful players. Now, this vice president of scouting development is looking at kids at the high school level, 15, 16, 17, 18, mostly 16, 17, 18. But on the international level, they're looking at talent as young as 14, 15, because the signing window is a little earlier internationally. With that said, this is somebody who really knows where a player is at and where they're likely to end up from a young age up to the peak of a baseball career. This was a long interview. I listened to the whole thing, and I'm always asking myself, does everything this person is saying add up? Are they contradicting themselves? Does everything add up? Does it make sense? Does it align with everything that I've seen over almost 40 years of watching baseball? I look at everything from a critical standpoint only to get the truth out of it. It's not to say, hey, this person's a liar or this person's wrong. It's not to say I gotcha, but I'm always listening with scrutiny. I'm always looking at things like they have to prove to me that what they're saying adds up. I'm always a skeptic from the start, but I definitely go in open-minded with the hopes of hearing something that does add up across the board and is something that we could use and gain knowledge and wisdom from. And this interview provided a big one. This vice president of scouting development for a major league team said the number one attribute of players that make it and are successful long-term in baseball is that they have stick-to-itiveness. They have resilience, grit. They deal with failure the best. So here are 3 ways we can help develop this stick-to-itiveness, this resilience, this characteristic, this attribute in our young players. Real quick. So the scouting development vice president said, of course, there's talent and those physical skills, but the number one commonality that he has seen over the years is the ability to deal with failure, to push through, to be resilient, and to stick with it. And if you think about it, there are players in the major leagues that are 6'7" and 5'8". There are players that weigh 250 pounds, and there are players that weigh 160 pounds. There are left-handers, there are right-handers, there are switch hitters. There are pitchers that throw this pitch and that different type of pitch and this speed and that speed. There's hitters with all sorts of different swings, pitchers with all sorts of different deliveries. There are players that are fast and there are players that are not fast at all. There are players that can play first base great, but not other spots. There are players that can play outfield great, but wouldn't make for great catchers. And you could go on and on talking about the differences. But the one thing that they have in common, according to this scouting development director, is the ability, the mindset, of resilience, overcoming failure, and sticking to moving forward and avoiding big dips, not listening to other people when they say they can't do it. If anything, using that as fuel to spark the fire to drive them to do even better. So, like I said, here are 3 ways to develop this in young players. Number 1, how we frame failure as coaches with our coaching messages. How we frame failure with our messages will have a big impact on how our players see failure. Do we frame it as a dead end, or do we frame it as a positive, a constructive building block, a step up towards more success rather than a fall or a step down toward more failure? So, how we frame our coaching message and how we describe and discuss and shine a light on failure as a positive, as something that's an absolute, that's going to happen. How we frame it will have a big impact on the amount of resilience and stick to itiveness our players have. On a related note, using the word problem, such as, hey, here's the problem with your swing, or here's the problem with your throw, here's the problem with how you're fielding. Using the word problem sounds more permanent, but rather by using the word challenge, it's seen as something that can be pushed through, overcome, conquered. So that's a simple example of just reframing it. Instead of using the word problem, use the word challenge. Hey, here's the challenge that you have with your swing. Here's the challenge we got to work through. Here's the challenge you have right now as a catcher, as an outfielder. The challenge for you is going to be X, Y, and Z, or hopefully just X and then get that good and then work to Y and Z. So, how we frame failure as coaches. This can cultivate a resilient mindset. Number 2, how we as coaches respond to failure. How are we modeling a response to failure? Not just what we say, but just as importantly, our body language. As coaches, we need to be very careful what we say and what our body says after the team has not had success or after a player fails to have success. So, how we respond to failure, how we respond to a loss, how we respond to one of our players striking out or walking 3 straight batters, what comes out of our mouth, but also, just as importantly, our body language in response to those situations can help model and set the tone for how we want our players to respond to failure, to rebound, to move forward with the attitude, quote, so what next pitch? So what next hitter? And number 3 of these 3 ways that we can help develop resiliency, stick-to-itiveness, the ability to bounce back from failure within our young players. Number 3, make our practices more challenging, at least parts of our practice, make it more challenging than our games. By making our practices more challenging, they are going to fail more, and therefore our players are going to get more reps working on bouncing back from an error, a failure, a struggle. Not only that, by making our practices more challenging, inherently kids are going to fail more at practice. This helps to desensitize them, at least more so, to the failure, to the struggles. I truly believe that there are a lot of players out there that don't handle failure come game time because the practices are so darn easy. They're having so much success in practice. Of course, the game is frustrating. Practice was so easy. The drills were so easy. They were designed for us to be successful, to feel good about ourselves. Yeah, having confidence is one thing. We don't want to make the drills or practices so difficult that they don't have any success. That's not a good idea. But it should be a balance of success and failure. And I truly believe good practice design is built around practices that lead inherently to a larger amount of failure by our players than the typical game. Almost every practice I go out and assess and analyze is too easy. We're trying to make our kids feel good at practice. What we don't realize is that this often leads to them, 1, being in a state of shock when the game is really hard, and 2, they haven't had much practice bouncing back from a strikeout, bouncing back from missing a grounder, bouncing back from losing a drill, losing a challenge, a competition. By doing more competitions at practice, kids are likely going to fail more often in a competition setting, which is what a game is. It leads them to a better mindset. It desensitizes them to failure. All right, so to recap, these are 3 ways we can help to develop, improve resiliency, stick-to-itiveness in our players. And again, this was the number 1 thing this vice president of scouting development said they look for in young players. The number 1 commonality that they've seen in young players that have gone on and had successful careers in baseball. And I think this is the same for business or any sport or anything. Stick-to-itiveness. So the 3 recommendations: we need to frame failure better as coaches when we're giving our coaching messages. The words we choose can frame failure more as a learning opportunity, a necessary part of growth, the path to success, something we want to run toward, something that we're ready for. Number 2, what our body language is saying when our players fail, when our team fails, and also those comments that come right after failure. So our body language and comments right after a player strikes out, right after they walk a hitter, right after they hit a batter, right after they miss a ground ball, right after they airmail a throw to the first baseman, right after they drop a fly ball in the outfield, right after they get picked off on the bases. What we say and our body language right after that is going to say a lot about how we look at failure. And also, we want to keep our players a little more even keel and not make such a big deal out of failure. So pouting, kicking the dirt, shaking your head, going, "Oh man," or "What the heck," or "We practiced this last week." All that stuff right there needs to not take place. Rather, the mindset is, all right, Johnny missed that fly ball. What's the main thing we could practice next week that would help him catch the next one? Now, I wouldn't even really get into it that quickly. I would look at the commonalities when it comes to failure across your team. And then once you see some bigger commonalities, address those first, kind of the 80-20 principle with this. But look through the windshield, less through the rearview mirror when you're coaching. Think of failure as something to grow from, move forward from, rather than to sit and dwell on looking in the rearview mirror. And number 3, make your practices more challenging. Get your kids to miss more ground balls in practice. Again, they need to have success in practice because there's a balance between confidence and challenge. We want to challenge them, but we also want them to have some confidence. If you haven't got the drill design guide, it's free at 8020baseball.com. The drill design guide, it's a 21-page PDF. I lay out exactly how to put together an awesome drill, and it talks about the 20-40-40 ratio. You got to read that. It's a combination of building confidence and building challenge into our drills. And by building more failure into practices, by making them more challenging, it helps to desensitize our players to failure. So ideally, they fail more often in practice, and thus the game is going to be perceived as a more successful experience. All right, that said, I got a tip for all of us. When our kids are acting a fool, or should I say, when kids are acting like kids, when they aren't listening, when they're loud, when they leave the dugout a mess, when they push each other, when they're squirrely, when they're chatty, when they're moody, when they're apathetic, lazy. They do these things because they're kids. It's their job to be this way. This is what kids do. Now, I'm getting this message from the Daily Dad newsletter that I get Monday through Friday in my inbox. I love it. It's about a 1-minute read, and it really helps set my mind for the day as a parent, because we all know parenting is not easy and there's no manual for it. There were no classes in school, but by having this 1 to 2-minute read every morning, it calibrates my mindset a lot better. It really has helped me, I think, be a better parent. But it might as well just be called the Daily Coach, because almost all of it is actionable for coaches. Guiding and leading kids that's what we're doing as parents. And there are so many commonalities between coaching and parenting and teaching. I think that's what's given me a lot of unique insight to this podcast is my 20 years of being a teacher at all different levels, but even more so in some of the hardest to teach areas. I taught a PE class in Paramount, California. They were on the news not that long ago, like a couple months ago. Paramount, California was on the news nationwide. There was a dude in the center divider throwing rocks and bricks at cars, at government cars. Paramount, California borders Compton. I taught a class at Paramount High that had 107 kids. I think it topped out at 107 kids at one time. It was a summer school class for 6 weeks from 8 o'clock to 1 o'clock, 5 hours a day, no lunch break or any of that, no recess break, 5 hours. Me by myself, no second teacher, no teacher's aide. There were multiple gangs represented. These were freshmen through senior in high school. You learn what really works when you're in these extremely challenging situations. And why I'm talking about teaching is that parallel between like being a parent, being a dad, being a coach, being a teacher. There's so many commonalities, and I think that's huge. It's given me such an insight. Managing 10-year-old baseball players on a baseball field is a cakewalk after trying to manage 5 hours of 107 kids from the city of Paramount, many of which, almost half the kids lived in the city of Compton. Half a dozen were from Watts. Many of them were gang members. I also had a handful of special ed kids. I had one kid who was very far down the spectrum of autism, all in one class. Imagine 30 days for 5 hours. And I did this multiple summers. And that was just extra on top of my regular teaching stuff, which was typically 25 to 30 up to 60 kids at a time. So I'm running drills, I'm running P classes, I'm running basketball practice, I'm literally running sports, soccer things with kids that don't want to be there, not just 12 kids, 10 kids, 14, but 30, 50, 100 kids at one time. And I think that's really helped me understand team management, classroom management, culture management, because you find out really quick what doesn't work and what does. You're not getting away with anything. You got to be good or you're going to get run over. So handling a dozen baseball players, thankfully now for me, is so easy because it sharpened those skills that I needed. And for example, reading the Daily Dad newsletter every day. This is applicable to coaching. So with regard to the message I'm bringing up right now as we finish this episode, the title of this recent newsletter, the Daily Dad newsletter email was, "This is why they're like this. The reason they're not listening, the reason they're so loud, the reason they leave a mess, the reason they're hitting each other, the reason they're moody or lazy or tired or chatty, the reason is because they're kids." So when we get to practice and we expect perfection, perfect little angels, kids that are going to toe the line and they're going to behave 100% of the time, it's such a far-fetched expectation. It's only going to lead us to disappointment and frustration. So let's calibrate our mindset in that when we're driving to practice, say, hey, kids are going to be squirrely. There's going to be a lazy kid or two. There's going to be a kid not paying attention. There's going to be some kids not hustling. There's going to be some kids talking when I'm talking. There's probably going to be a kid that teases another kid. Now, we do everything we can to minimize and reduce these things, of course, but we would be foolish to show up to practice or a game and not think this stuff's going to happen, because it is. The kids are just doing their job. That's what kids do. They make mistakes. They don't listen. They're moody. They're messy. They test boundaries. They challenge coaches. They sit around and don't help out sometimes. They do that. Now, it's our job to lead them so they don't do it as much, or ideally, by the end of the season, maybe not at all in certain areas and categories. But we should not be surprised by any of this. So having this mindset when we roll out there is going to help us be so much calmer. It's lowering our expectations. It's aligning our expectations with reality, which is always a good place to be. All right, I have a small ask. If you are enjoying this podcast and getting a lot out of it, can you take a few minutes right now and leave a review for this podcast? It's a fairly easy thing to do. Shouldn't take you more than a few minutes, and it would be really appreciated. All right, next week, episode 300. We got a good one next week. You're going to want to be here for episode 300. I got some tips, some topics that I've been saving for episode 300. So can't wait to be with you next week. Send me your emails, coachbo@8020baseball.com, or through the contact page on the website, 8020baseball.com. Send me your questions. Send me success stories that you're having. Got all those articles and videos on the website too. All right, you all rock, because you are coaches that want to be better. That's why you're listening to this. You want to be better, and that says a lot about you. Props to you. I always say, being a coach, especially at the youth level, a volunteer coach, being a coach is one of the greatest things to hang our hat on in terms of giving back, in terms of helping out our community, society, giving back to the next generation and leaving it better, having that positive impact, being a youth baseball coach. And you're here because you want to be a good one, and some of you are on your way to being great ones. That's why you keep showing up here each week. Head over to 8020baseball.com, elevate your game even more. Y'all take care. And until next week, let's continue to take care of our health so we can be at our best for our families, our close friends, our players. Let's take this information out there to the field, put it into play. Y'all take care. Till next week, adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Podcast, the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. We got this. Now, let's take the field.